For half an hour, he had silently watched his captivating wife glide through the ballroom, determined that by midnight, she'd be far from him, among the room's wealthy and self-satisfied guests. She moved like a prized delicacy at a feast, admired, embraced, and kissed by nearly every executive from his office, with his unbearably arrogant boss leading the charge. It wasn't unexpected. The same degrading spectacle had unfolded at the company's New Year's gatherings for the past 2 years. The first time, he dismissed it, chalking her antics up to too much champagne. But last year, as the party roared louder, he began to form a plan. His thoughts were interrupted by a tug on his sleeve. He turned to find Deidre, Rosalind's closest friend and frequent accomplice in mischief. "Happy New Year, Anthony," she exclaimed, leaning in for the customary kiss, a gesture he barely acknowledged before pulling back and meeting her gaze. Deidre was another of the trust fund elite, her fortune even larger than Rosalind's. Her usual expression carried a smugness that silently mocked his lack of old money roots. Tonight, though, her face showed something unusual, a mix of pity and concern. "Don't take it so hard, Anthony," she said softly. "It's just tradition. She'll come back to you soon, and everything will be fine. She loves you, you know." He raised a skeptical brow. Deidre pressed on. "She does. Rosalind's just vibrant and social while you're more reserved, introspective. She needs to surround herself with energy sometimes, but it only makes her value you more when she comes back." "Oh, really, Deidre?" he replied coolly. "Is that why she spent the Christmas party under the mistletoe with half her colleagues at her event? She danced with everyone but me, and now at mine, she's taking it even further. Let's call it what it is. Is kissing Peter Diasso a dozen times part of this tradition, or is it her unique way of showing love, knowing how much I despise him?" DRA's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She avoided his gaze as she murmured, "Anthony, I know you're upset, but try to see the bigger picture." "Oh, I see it clearly," he shot back. "For the first time in 5 years of marriage, everything makes sense." He turned and walked to their table, retrieving a large, brightly wrapped package from underneath. He removed his wedding ring and tied it to the ribbon on the gift without facing her. He held it out to Deidre. "I'm leaving. Give this to your friend when or if she's done with her admirers. Wish her a happy new year. And let her know I hope she gets exactly what she deserves." As he moved to leave, Deidre grabbed his arm. "Don't do this, Anthony," she pleaded. "I'll get her. She's just had too much to drink. Take her home." He shook his head. "No need. She's staying here. She booked a suite earlier today, entertaining while I was working. You knew, didn't you? You were here with her. She has her car, her things. One of her companions will make sure she's comfortable. Maybe all of them will." Deidre stared, stunned. "Don't look at me like that," he added. "You lied to me last year. I gave her this year to make a choice. She's made it, so have I. Goodbye, Deidre. I'll be glad never to see you again." Leaving the ballroom, Anthony nodded to Helen, the HR director, who had spent the afternoon with him while his boss and colleagues celebrated in the suite. In reality, they had been indulging on the company's dime. Rosalie had been there too. Anthony had the evidence, photos and videos, so did Helen, who was about to share them with the board chairman. Inside, Helen and her husband made their way to the crowd around Rosalie DRA. Meanwhile, Deidre pushed through the revelers, avoiding drunken attempts from men seeking another traditional kiss. Helen's husband's imposing presence cleared a path as Helen reached Peter Moore, the CEO, at the same moment Deidre did. Deidre's sharp call of Rosalie's name made her turn abruptly, breaking away from Peter's embrace with a frown. Deidre thrust the package into Rosalie's hands. "Anthony left this for you," she said. "He's gone. He saw everything tonight." Rosalie laughed dismissively. "Oh, Anthony. He always gets sulky when I don't pay him attention. I'll go home, apologize, and he'll feel foolish. He loves me too much to stay angry." She smiled at the gift. "See, even when he's upset, he leaves me presents. Let's see what it is." "Wait," DRA began, but Rosalie was already untying the ribbon. The ring fell to the floor. Rosalie froze. Peter picked it up, smirking. "Isn't this your husband's wedding ring?" Rosalie's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she took it from him. She glanced at DRA, who whispered, "I tried to warn you," ignoring her. Rosalie tore off the wrapping paper to reveal a white box, smiling nervously. "It's heavy," she noted, prying at the tape as the last strip came free. The box's contents spilled onto the floor, glossy photographs and documents scattered everywhere. Rosalie crouched to gather them, others stepping in to help. But as they saw the images, everyone froze. Rosalie's eyes widened in horror. "No!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the noise and silencing the room. More onlookers gathered, drawn to the commotion, as her meticulously crafted facade shattered. Anthony was already far away. DRA's eyes widened in bewilderment when she saw the horror on Peter's face. He stooped down, picked up the glossy photograph from the floor, and pressed it against his immaculate suit. His voice thundered through the room as he shouted, "Rosalie, what in the world is this?" The outburst drew every gaze toward the scattered photos carpeting the floor. Each image depicted Rosalie in compromising situations with various individuals, who were clearly not her husband. Among the damning photographs were shots of Rosalie with Peter himself, alongside others featuring her entangled with executives from Anthony's firm, her colleagues, and even her higher-ups. Though not an exhaustive catalog, the collection revealed an explicit array of encounters involving men, women, and various other participants and configurations. Rosalie's response was dramatic. She crumpled to the ground in a faint. Quick-thinking Peter nudged his foot beneath her head just in time, sparing her from a painful collision with the hard tiles. Dropping to her knees, he gently cradled Rosalie's head and began patting her cheeks while shouting, "Rosalie, wake up! Can you hear me? Are you okay?" While DRA tended to the unconscious Rosalie, others in the room began gathering up the incriminating photos. A particular woman, upon examining one of the images, turned on her husband with fury. "You lying cheat! No wonder you're always too exhausted for me," she shrieked. Her husband's feeble attempt at denial was cut short as her handbag connected with his face, eliciting a yelp. Matters worsened for him when she delivered a sharp kick to his groin, leaving him doubled over in agony. As he writhed, she crouched and rifled through the photographs, lifting one for all to see. She declared loudly, "If your husband works in management at Clements & Sons, you'll want to have a look. These faces might be familiar." Another voice chimed in from across the room. "There are USB drives here too. Who knows what's on them?" The chaos intensified as a striking blonde confronted a well-dressed older man, waving a photograph in his face. "Remember our prenup? You're finished, you shameless creep." The man stammered, "Sweetheart, it's not what it looks like. She threw herself at me, I swear. It only happened once, and it meant nothing." Ignoring his protests, the blonde's fiery gaze followed him as he fled the room, her threats ringing in his ears. Elsewhere, a woman clutched a photo to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Beside her, her husband buried his face in his hands, silently weeping. In another corner, a man waved an incriminating picture at his wife, his voice trembling with anger. "You've always refused a threesome, claiming you'd never consider it. What's your excuse for this then?" The accused woman flushed scarlet and retreated hastily, her towering stilettos clicking awkwardly against the floor. One particularly bold woman gathered a handful of photographs and stood in the ballroom center, calling out names one by one. Bewildered wives came forward to claim the images, their initial confusion turning to rage as they confronted their husbands, delivering slaps and angry tirades. This dramatic sequence played out again and again, leaving a trail of humiliated men nursing both physical and emotional wounds. As Rosalie stirred, she found herself sitting upright in DRA's supportive arms, her expression dazed as she took in the pandemonium around her. A man in an elegant tuxedo knelt by her side, speaking softly. "Are you all right?" She nodded faintly, still disoriented. "What's your name?" he continued, summoning a steady tone despite her evident despair. She replied, "I'm Rosalie Martin. though I doubt anyone can help me now. His eyebrows rose in recognition. Rosalie Martin, he echoed. When she confirmed with another nod, he pulled out a stack of papers and handed them to her without hesitation. He snapped a photo of her with his phone and announced loudly, "Miss Martin, you've been officially served. These documents and the attached photos and videos are part of Anthony Martin's divorce proceedings." He turned to the stunned crowd and declared, "For those who haven't yet seen the photos, they're included in these public filings. They document Miss Martin's activities over the past year, complete with dates and locations. If anyone wants additional details or digital copies, you can reach out to me for a small fee, of course." Offering a theatrical bow, he exited the room, leaving behind a storm of tears, fury, and recriminations. As he walked away, he reflected on his antics, wondering if they might one day lead to trouble. Though his New Jersey connections gave him confidence, he could weather any fallout. Rosalie, still clutching the divorce papers, sat motionless, her confidence shattered. She scanned the faces around her, finding only contempt, pity, or disgust. The admiration and envy she once thrived on had vanished. Overwhelmed by humiliation, she buried her face in Dee's chest and sobbed uncontrollably. Nearby, Peter Clem barked orders to his staff, "Gather every single one of those photos and destroy them immediately." Turning his glare to Helen, he snapped, "I want a reprimand letter from Anthony Martin on my desk by Monday," followed by his termination papers. Helen remained composed as she replied, "That won't be possible, sir. Mr. Martin resigned earlier today. He's already used his accrued leave and submitted 2 weeks' notice." Peter's face reddened with fury. "Then I'll reject his resignation. He's fired anyway. I'll make sure he never works in this industry again." Helen's calm demeanor didn't falter. "I'm afraid that won't work, sir." Before leaving, Mr. Martin met with the chairman of the board, your father, who accepted his resignation. Additionally, Mr. Martin already has a new position with a consulting firm, which you personally approved in writing. Peter's anger boiled over, and he began muttering curses aimed at both his father and Anthony Martin. Meanwhile, Helen and her husband exchanged discreet glances, their hands clasping under the table in silent celebration. Their outward expressions remained professionally neutral as Anthony Martin steered his freshly delivered, custom-designed all-wheel drive Chevrolet SUV out of New York City. The deep growl of its 6.2L turbo diesel engine mirrored his sense of emancipation. He had commissioned the vehicle when the latest models were unveiled the previous autumn, and it had finally been delivered just yesterday. His GPS estimated the drive to his new residence in Austin, Texas, would span 24 hours and 32 minutes, but Anthony wasn't in a hurry. A small-town Idahoan at heart, he planned to relish the journey, soaking in the rural charm and cultural highlights along the way. His itinerary included detours through Virginia's scenic routes, bypassing major highways in favor of the back roads celebrated in folk songs and nostalgic lyrics. Anthony envisioned himself pausing to browse roadside stalls laden with homemade preserves and savoring meals at quaint diners where the locals gathered, a world apart from the urban grind he had grown to despise. The divorce proceedings with his ex-wife were finalized, and although the financial division was not completely balanced, he had enough money to buy an $888,000 SUV, a choice he considered a symbolic victory. Rosalie, who had consistently earned 10 times his income during their marriage, might hardly notice the loss. But for Anthony, using a portion of that money to reclaim his independence was poetic. Under their agreement, they each kept their respective investments and retirement savings. She retained her penthouse and trust fund. As long as she agreed to sign the papers promptly, terms Anthony thought were more than generous. With the radio tuned to a classic country station, music filled the car. Rosalie had always loathed Anthony, but now he felt a surge of freedom for the first time in years. He was in full control of his life, no longer the submissive spouse she had often belittled. His determination had crystallized when the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, and every day since had been devoted to this moment. The fate of Clemens and Sons, the company he had worked to build, was no longer his concern. Bereft of his groundbreaking designs and patents, The business was now under Peter's inept leadership, and Anthony felt certain it would crumble within a year or two. The thought brought a satisfied smirk to his face. Anthony took pride in knowing that his contributions had accounted for over half of the company's revenue the previous year. He had even more innovative designs ready for his next venture. He imagined Randolph Clemens, the company's aging chairman and Peter's father, scrambling to salvage the firm before it sank completely. Peter's inadequacies would soon be glaringly evident, and the thought filled Anthony with a sense of vindication. The plans he had orchestrated to expose both Peter and Rosalie as dishonest were unfolding seamlessly. His new enterprise, he was certain, would soon overshadow his old one, leaving Peter's incompetence exposed to all. The dramatic reveal Anthony had staged at the gala had already caused ripples. Helen, a trusted ally, had called to praise the flawless execution of the event. The photos strategically placed around the ballroom had surpassed his expectations. He had designed the box holding the photos to collapse spectacularly when unsealed, ensuring maximum impact. Rosalie's parents, who had always dismissed him due to his non-Ivy League education, had been particularly scornful of his engineering credentials despite his degrees from the prestigious Colorado School of Mines and the University of Michigan. Their disdain only made their humiliation sweeter. Meanwhile, Rosalie's night had ended in heartbreak. Driven home by her parents, she broke down completely upon entering their apartment. On the ride over, she had mentally rehearsed a justification for her actions, intending to argue that her extramarital affairs had no impact on her love for Anthony. She planned to frame them as harmless stress-relieving diversions that even strengthened their relationship. But she knew deep down that Anthony, uncompromising in his view of their vows, would never buy such excuses. Seeing their home devoid of his belongings forced her to confront the finality of their split. Rosalie collapsed onto the floor, consumed by a mixture of regret and fury at her own hubris. She had never anticipated this outcome. Confident in her ability to manipulate Anthony's forgiving nature, for 3 years, she had deceived him without a second thought. But now her carefully crafted image lay in ruins. Anthony's departure was more than a personal loss. It was a devastating blow to her social standing. While Anthony embarked on his new chapter, he ensured his departure left a trail of reckoning. He had cloned his SIM card before discarding the original, giving him control over communication while remaining untraceable. Scheduled emails sent damning evidence to unsuspecting spouses, unraveling relationships one by one. Anthony derived grim satisfaction from the upheaval he caused, particularly in sending irrefutable proof of DRA's complicity to her husband, Deidre. Deidre, who had encouraged Rosalie's behavior with gleeful abandon, now faced the consequences alongside her friend in New York. Deidre and Rosalie sat in shock as their world crumbled. Deidre's husband, Al, had expelled her after receiving an anonymous email and video evidence, which documented not just infidelities but also incriminating conversations. Al had forwarded the footage to the spouses of the named men, igniting a chain reaction of betrayals and revelations. Meanwhile, Peter was swiftly disowned by his father and removed from the company. Randolph, stepping in as interim CEO, began the arduous process of rebuilding, enlisting Anthony's help to stabilize the business. Anthony's journey brought him to Austin, where he navigated the streets with a sense of anticipation. His new company had provided a luxury high-rise apartment with 6 months of prepaid rent, giving him time to find a home that matched his vision of open spaces and greenery. He looked forward to adopting a dog and meeting someone who shared his values and aspirations. His partners had organized a barbecue to introduce him to the local community, promising a chance to meet potential companions. Back in New York, the scandal Anthony had unleashed continued to spread, exposing lies and unraveling lives. Helen kept him updated, recounting each dramatic turn with relish. As Anthony drove through Austin, surrounded by the promise of a fresh start, he felt nothing but gratitude for the bold decision to leave the chaos behind and rebuild his life in Texas.